He let a stranger take his parking spot in the rain and watched her get fired for it the next morning. Nathan Cole had been circling the garage on West Madison for 4 minutes, which in Chicago winter terms was the equivalent of a minor survival event. The heat in his rental car had given up somewhere around the 3rd floor, his phone was at 11%, and he had a 10 a.m. call with the Meridian board that he could not afford to take from the sidewalk. He finally saw a space opening on level 2. He put on his blinker. Then he saw her. She was already in the garage on foot, which meant she had walked from somewhere in the sleet, coat dark with water, a canvas tote over one shoulder spilling folders from the top. She was moving toward the stairwell when a puddle caught her heel, and she stumbled, folders sliding across the concrete floor in a fan of papers. She dropped to her knees immediately, gathering them with the practiced speed of someone who had embarrassed herself before and learned to recover without audience. Nathan pulled forward instead of into the space. He rolled down the passenger window. "Do you need help?" She looked up. Her expression said she had not expected the car to speak to her. "I'm fine. Your quarterly reports are heading toward the drain." She glanced to her left. One folder had indeed migrated toward the floor drain at the center of the lane. She made a sound that was not quite a word and lunged for it. Nathan put the car in park, got out, and helped her collect the last of the papers. Up close, she looked like someone who had started the day at 5 a.m. and already lost 2 arguments with it. There was an ink stain on her left cuff. Her badge from Meridian Capital was clipped to the tote at a 45-degree angle, like it had been attached in an elevator. "Thank you," she said, not warmly, but not ungratefully either, the tone of someone who was running late and did not have time for social performance. "Meridian Capital," Nathan said, reading the badge before he meant to. She glanced at it, then at him. "Don't hold it against me." "Long week?" "Long year." She adjusted the tote strap, tucked the rescued folder against her chest. "You can have the spot. I don't have a car." She said it flatly, the way people mentioned facts they had made peace with. Nathan watched her push through the stairwell door. He stood in the cold parking garage for a moment longer than made sense. He took the spot. Her name, he learned from the badge in that 2-second glance, was Sylvie Marsh. Nathan Cole had been the CEO of Vantage Group for 6 years. In that time, he had acquired 4 companies, restructured 2, and learned to read the condition of a business the way a doctor read a patient's face. You looked at the people first, not the spreadsheets. The spreadsheets told you what had already happened. The people told you what was still happening. Vantage Group had completed the acquisition of Meridian Capital 11 weeks ago. Since then, Nathan had been receiving reports from the internal review team that he was finding difficult to reconcile with Meridian's publicly clean numbers, high turnover in the analyst division, 3 formal HR complaints in 18 months, all quietly resolved, 2 senior employees departing the same quarter without stated reasons, a pattern of after-hours communication that showed one particular manager sending assignment revisions at 11 p.m. with 6 a.m. follow-up emails asking why the work wasn't finished yet. The manager's name was Garrett Finch. Nathan had decided to observe before acting. He had flown in from Denver under the name of a mid-level operations consultant and taken a rental car and a nondescript hotel room on Michigan Avenue. He had attended 2 internal Meridian meetings as a background figure, introduced vaguely as an integration specialist. No one had paid particular attention to him, which was the point. He had not expected to almost steal a parking spot from someone who worked there. He found Sylvie Marsh in Meridian's internal directory that afternoon. Sylvie Marsh, senior financial analyst, 5 years at the company. He found one performance note in her file, filed 8 months ago, describing her as detail-oriented but occasionally resistant to feedback. The note had been submitted by Garrett Finch. He pulled up Finch's other performance notes. The phrase occasionally resistant to feedback appeared in 7 of them, spread across 4 different employees, all female, all in the analyst division, all filed in the months following a major project completion. Nathan closed the file and sat with that for a while. The next morning he was early to the Meridian building. He took the elevator to the 14th floor and stood near the kitchen alcove with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime the previous week. He watched the floor come alive. People arrived in coats and quiet urgency, shook the cold off, checked phones. The particular quality of Monday morning dread that lived in open-plan offices. Sylvie arrived at 8:41. Her coat was dry today. She had the same canvas tote, but the folders were inside it this time. She sat at a desk near the east window, opened her laptop, and within 4 minutes had her head down and was working. Garrett Finch arrived at 9:02 in a way that required the whole floor to register it. He spoke loudly to 2 people by the door, laughed at something no one else seemed to find funny, and made his way to his glass-walled office with the energy of a man who had decided the building existed to receive him. Nathan watched. At 9:47, Finch appeared at Sylvie's desk. Nathan was close enough to observe, but not close enough to hear. What he could see was Sylvie's posture shift the moment Finch stopped beside her, a small but total change. The way a person braced when they already knew what was coming. Finch spoke. Sylvie pointed at something on her screen. Finch shook his head. He took the mouse and moved it himself, the way someone took a tool from another person's hand without asking. He spoke again, then he walked away. Sylvie turned back to her screen. She did not move for a moment. Then she adjusted her keyboard, straightened a notepad, and kept working. It was the straightening that told Nathan the most. The careful reassembly of the workspace, the tiny act of order after being made to feel disordered. He knew that gesture. He had seen it before in other offices at other companies he had walked into too late. He took a longer walk around the floor. A young analyst named Peter, who seemed to believe Nathan was genuinely an operations consultant, answered his questions about workflow, credit, and deadlines with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for an adult to ask. Peter described a recent client pitch that had gone well. He mentioned Sylvie's name 3 times when talking about the underlying analysis. He mentioned Finch's name 0 times in the same context, then paused and said, "The presentation was led by Garrett." "Who built the model?" Nathan asked. Peter looked at the middle distance for a moment. "The team," he said carefully. Nathan nodded like that was a complete answer. That afternoon he was in the elevator when Sylvie stepped in at the 4th floor. She looked at him for half a second, the way you look at someone you have almost remembered. "Garage," she said. "Garage," he confirmed. "You work here now?" "Temporarily, integration review." She pressed the lobby button. "What are you integrating?" "Still figuring that out." She looked at him sideways. "That either means you're very thorough or you haven't started." "Could be both." She almost smiled. "How's the parking spot working out?" "Drafty. The car has no heat." "That's Chicago's way of testing you." The elevator opened. They stepped out into the lobby together. "For what it's worth," Sylvie said, pulling on her gloves, "that spot is cursed. Every person who parks there leaves the building before noon." Nathan watched her walk out into the cold. He stayed in the lobby for a moment. Then he went back upstairs and called his operations director in Denver and told him to move the all-staff meeting to Wednesday. Meridian Capital's conference room smelled like fresh coffee and old anxiety on Wednesday morning. The staff had been told to expect a brief introduction from Vantage Group's integration team. The calendar invite had gone out the night before under the subject line Operational Alignment Update, which was company language for something is changing, and we haven't decided how honest to be about it yet. Sylvie Marsh arrived early, because she always did. She chose a seat along the side wall, which Nathan would later realize was the seat of someone who had learned not to be in the front row. Garrett Finch took the chair nearest the screen with the ease of someone who had claimed that space long ago and expected no one to contest it. Nathan walked in at exactly 9. He was wearing the same kind of coat he had worn in the garage, unremarkable, mid-range, nothing that announced anything. He carried no folder, no laptop, no presentation clicker. He set his coffee cup on the table and looked around the room with the calm of someone who had already read the whole book and was waiting for everyone else to reach the last chapter. Finch looked up, smiled the practiced smile of a man who believed he was about to be handed something, and said, "Good morning. I assume you're leading the integration overview?" "I am, Nathan Voss." He paused. He was not wearing a visitor badge. He had not introduced himself beyond those 4 words. He let the pause do work. Someone in the back row opened a laptop and typed something. The name search would take about 12 seconds. It took 8. A sound moved through the room, not a gasp, more like the specific silence that follows a room realizing the temperature has changed. Finch's smile held, but something underneath it shifted. Nathan saw it the way you see a crack forming in plaster. "Nathan Voss," Nathan said, addressing the room, not Finch specifically, "CEO, Vantage Group. I've been here since Monday, which some of you may have noticed and most of you will now remember differently." A few people looked at him with new eyes. Peter, the young analyst, blinked. The woman beside him looked at the ceiling briefly. Sylvie Marsh looked at the table in front of her. Her expression was very still, the way a person went still when they were processing too many things at once and couldn't afford to show any of them. Nathan turned to the screen. He walked through what his team had found, not as accusations but as observations, the kind that required no interpretation. Timeline of projects submitted under team names with lead analyst uncredited. Performance flags filed within 2 weeks of project completions. Communication logs showing revision requests sent at hours that assumed no one had a life outside the building. 3 HR complaints closed without documented resolution. He did not say Sylvie Marsh's name. He did not need to. The credit analysis on the screen showed project contributions matched to email timestamps, and her work was visible in the data the same way structural damage was visible once you knew where to look. Garrett Finch spoke. Of course he did. He said the data had been taken out of context. He said he had always operated with high standards and that strong managers were often misread as difficult by employees who resisted accountability. He said the Vantage integration team had likely misunderstood Meridian's internal culture. He said, turning briefly toward Sylvie's side of the room, that some employees cultivated a perception of being undervalued as a personal narrative rather than an accurate reflection of performance. The room went very quiet. Nathan let the quiet last exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he said, "Garrett Finch's employment with Meridian Capital is terminated, effective today." He did not say it loudly, he did not need to. Finch pushed back his chair. He said Nathan was making a short-sighted decision. He said this would destabilize the team. He said good management was never understood in real time, only in retrospect. Nathan listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "HR will meet with you in 20 minutes. Thank you for your time here." Finch left, not gracefully. Nathan turned back to the rest of the room, where 17 people were sitting in the specific, careful stillness of people who had been waiting a long time for something and did not yet know if they were allowed to feel relieved. "Meridian will be under a full management review over the next 30 days, Nathan said. Not because one manager failed, because one manager was allowed to continue. That difference is the one we're here to correct." After the meeting, the floor had the charged and fragile quality of a room where the windows had just been opened after a long winter. People stood in small clusters and spoke in lower voices than usual. Some looked lighter, some looked afraid of looking lighter too soon. Sylvie did not find Nathan. She went back to her desk and began working. He found her 2 hours later near the east window where the afternoon light came in at a low angle. She was on the phone, walking through a model with someone, her voice steady and technical and specific. Nathan waited. She finished the call, set the phone down, and looked at the window for a moment before turning. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the elevator, like someone reassessing what she thought she knew. "The parking spot," she said. "Not a consultant," he said. "I noticed you didn't have a visitor badge on Wednesday." "Most people didn't." "I did." She turned back to her screen, made a small note. "How long were you here before you knew about Garrett?" "I came in already knowing. I was here to understand how it had lasted that long." She was quiet for a moment. "And did you figure that out?" "The systems that kept him in place were older than he was. He just knew how to use them." Sylvie nodded slowly. "So he gets walked out and the systems stay." "That's what the next 30 days are for." She looked at him. "You're telling me that like I should be reassured." "I'm telling you because you're the person in this room who already knew the answer before I asked the question." She was quiet again. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, The quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth they wanted to hand over to someone they didn't fully trust yet. "You know what the worst part is?" she said eventually. "It's not that he took credit for the work. It's that after a while you start to do it yourself. You start writing his name on things before he asks. Because it's easier, and then one day you realize you can't remember the last time you sent something out with your own name on the front." Nathan didn't have an immediate answer for that. He was aware that the lack of one was the most honest response available. "I deserve that," he said. "You deserve worse," she said, "but I'm at work." He almost smiled. Fair. She picked up her phone and looked at her screen. "The parking spot," she said again, more quietly this time. "You got out of the car to help. You were losing documents to a drain. A lot of people saw that and kept driving." "I know." She looked at him for a moment longer than she had to. "The review team, will they actually talk to people, or will they conduct the kind of listening exercise that produces a report no one reads?" "They'll talk to people. And caregivers. Because 3 of us on this floor have been quietly penalized for every doctor's appointment and school pickup for the last 2 years, and that never made it into any formal complaint because we needed the benefits. That goes in the review. Documented with names, not anonymized into irrelevance. Documented." She held his gaze for a moment, the way a person checked whether a door was actually unlocked before trusting their weight to it. Then she nodded once and turned back to her screen. Nathan walked back toward the conference room. The afternoon felt different from the morning, not lighter exactly, more honest, which was sometimes better. The story got out on a Thursday. By Friday morning, Sylvie Marsh had been mentioned in 4 different LinkedIn posts, 2 news aggregators, and a financial industry newsletter with a subscriber list of 70,000. The headline that did the most damage was also the most accurate, technically. She let a stranger take her parking spot. He turned out to be her new CEO. She found out from Peter, who appeared at her desk at 8:22 with his phone screen, turned toward her face, and the expression of a person delivering either very good or very bad news, and not sure which. Sylvie read the headline, then she read the first paragraph, then she put the phone face down on the desk. "People are saying you planned it," Peter offered, helpfully. "I was carrying folders in sleet." "Right, but people are saying." "Peter." "Yeah." "Please go do your job." He went. By mid-morning, her inbox had 15 messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, 3 interview requests from business media outlets, and 1 email from someone who wanted to license her story for a podcast series about women in finance. The subject line was "Your Incredible Journey." She sat with that for approximately 4 seconds, then moved it to trash. The internal effect was worse, in the specific way that internal effects always were. She became the woman who had brought down Garrett Finch through a parking lot accident, and proximity to power. Some people treated her with a new and irritating reverence, the kind where they talked to her more carefully, as if she might report anything to the CEO. Others looked at her with a coolness that suggested they had decided she was dangerous without doing the math on why that word kept following women who refused to disappear. Someone on the 3rd floor started calling her the lot girl. Sylvie heard it once, third hand, and spent a full 20 minutes being angrier about it than she wanted to be. She was 31 years old. She held a master's degree in financial analysis from Northwestern. She had built 3 of the 5 most profitable client models Meridian had produced in the last 2 years. She had done most of it on reduced hours and split attention because her younger sister Danny had been in post-surgical recovery for 5 months, and someone had to manage the care coordination and insurance disputes, while their parents worked hourly jobs in Columbus. She was not a lot girl. She was a person who had helped a stranger in a parking garage because that was a reasonable thing to do, and she did not need the universe to have assigned that decision a narrative arc in order for it to have been worth doing. She sent Nathan Voss an email, the subject line "The Review." She wrote that she was glad to participate in the management review, but wanted it on the record that she was participating as a professional with specific expertise in the operational failures of Meridian's analyst division, not as the human interest hook in a brand rehabilitation story. She wrote that she had prepared a memo detailing credit attribution failures, caregiver penalty patterns, and complaint escalation gap. She asked whether Vantage Group's review team was prepared to act on documented structural problems, or whether they were conducting the kind of listening exercise that produced a PDF that lived in a shared drive and changed nothing. She sent it and then immediately went to make coffee so she didn't have to watch the inbox. He replied in 7 minutes. "Send the memo. We're acting on it. You have my direct line. Use it if the review team gives you friction." She read it twice. Then she went back to her desk and pulled up the document she had been building quietly for 4 months, the one she had never sent to HR because she had watched 2 other people send things to HR and leave the company within 90 days. She spent the rest of the afternoon turning it into something impossible to ignore. Nathan received the memo at 4:47 p.m. and read it in full before he did anything else. It was 41 pages. It had headers, appendices, timestamps, and a summary section that laid out the pattern with the precision of someone who had been watching it long enough to understand its logic. He sent it to his operations director in Denver and said, "Read this tonight." Then he sat in the Meridian conference room alone for a while and thought about the 11 weeks between the acquisition and now, and what his team had been looking at and what they had missed. He had a good operations team. He had a strong HR process. He had a review protocol that was considered thorough by the standards of most acquisition integrations. None of it had surfaced what a 31-year-old analyst had documented on her own time while managing her sister's care coordination and doing work that kept getting forwarded under someone else's name. He put that thought somewhere it would stay. The board meeting the following Monday did not go easily. 2 board members had questions about the Finch termination. One described it as reactive. One asked whether the basis for the decision had been personal, a question Nathan understood was code for something else, specifically that a CEO who had spoken to a junior employee in a parking garage and observed her treatment firsthand could not be assumed to have made a fully objective call. Sylvie Marsh was in the room. She was there as a paid consultant to the review team, not because Nathan had put her there, but because she had negotiated her own terms, which included a seat at the table for the structural recommendations. Leah Torres, Nathan's operations director who had flown in from Denver, had described Sylvie as the most rigorously prepared person in any room she had been in this year, which was not a compliment Leah distributed lightly. When the board member asked whether the decision had been personal, Nathan said the decision had been documented. He handed the relevant material to the board member. He said the question of whether a CEO's first-hand observation of a workplace condition constituted a conflict of interest was worth examining. And he was happy to examine it, but it should also be examined alongside the question of why the same condition had failed to surface through the established channels designed specifically to catch it. The board member looked at the material. He did not ask the question again. Later in the elevator, Leah looked at Nathan. "You're going to tell me that wasn't personal," she said. "The decision wasn't." "The decision wasn't," she agreed. "What about the rest of it?" Nathan watched the floor numbers change. "I'm working on that," he said. Leah nodded, like that was exactly what she expected him to say, and slightly better than what she'd feared. 3 weeks into the review, Nathan knocked on the frame of Sylvie's open office door, which was a small door in the sense that it had been a windowed office before someone removed the glass and made it a pass-through supply room that Sylvie had claimed by putting her laptop in it, a plant that was doing better than expected, and a printed note on the door that said "Knock or don't." He knocked. She looked up. She had been on the phone again, working through something complicated with someone who was clearly not giving her the right numbers. He held up a coffee, one of the decent ones from the cart in the lobby, not the floor kitchen. She ended the call and took the coffee without commenting on it. "The credit documentation protocol," she said. "The review team wants to phase it in over 8 months. I told them 8 months is long enough for 3 more people to lose attribution on projects that will be presented to clients under someone else's name. What's your proposed timeline?" 60 days. What do they need to make 60 days work? She had the answer ready, because she always had the answer ready, which Nathan had stopped being surprised by. She walked him through the implementation gaps, the sign-off structure, the training requirements. She spoke precisely without hedging, and when she disagreed with his pushback on one point, she said so without softening it into a question. He liked that, more than he had expected to, and more than was entirely convenient. "Done," he said when she finished. 60 days, I'll send the revised scope to the review team today. She looked at him. "You could have emailed that." "I could have." She looked at the coffee, then at him. "There's a thing," she said, "where powerful people do small considerate gestures, and then the person on the other end spends the next 6 weeks trying to figure out if it means something, or if it's just how they manage." Nathan put his hands in his pockets. "Is that what you're doing?" "I was describing a phenomenon." "Describe it any way you want. I'll be direct if it's easier." He looked at her. "I'd like to have dinner with you, not as a review consultation, not as a gesture of corporate goodwill, as a question that you are completely free to answer no to." Sylvie was quiet for a moment. "See, now I have to decide whether to trust the directness or whether the directness is itself a management strategy." "It isn't." People who use directness as a management strategy always say that. "That's a valid point. I don't know how to prove the negative." She looked at him. He looked back and let her look. "The parking spot," she said eventually. "Yes." "You gave it up." "You were trying to get to work. Half the garage didn't get out of their cars." "I know." She picked up her coffee and turned back to her laptop, but not quite back to dismissal. "There's a Thai place on Dearborn that doesn't take reservations and has terrible lighting and the best curry in Chicago. If you show up there at 7 on a night that isn't Tuesday, I might also be there." "What's wrong with Tuesday?" "My sister has PT on Tuesdays and I do the pickup." "Then not Tuesday," Nathan said. She nodded, once, the way she nodded when she had decided something was acceptable. He took the coffee cup she had left on the edge of the desk and put it in the recycling on his way out. He did not look back through the glass, though he was aware of how much effort that required. Leah was waiting in the hallway. "Thai place on Dearborn," she said. "Were you standing there the whole time?" "The supply room has no soundproofing." She fell into step beside him. "For what it's worth, she's the best person you've put on the reform team." "I know. She's also the reason the reform team has any credibility with the floor staff." "I know that too." "So whatever that was," Leah said, gesturing back toward the supply room, "don't make her regret that she trusted you first." Nathan looked at his operations director. She had worked with him for 9 years and had never once told him what to do without being right. "I know," he said the third time, and meant it differently each time. Meridian Capital did not transform in a month. Real change in a company was not a moment. It was a decision made again every week by people who had been given enough room to make it. Some of that room Sylvie's memo had created directly. Some of it was slower. The caregiver policy was revised, not as a favor, as a correction. 3 employees who had received performance flags tied to caregiving responsibilities had those flags reviewed and removed. An overtime documentation requirement was introduced that made invisible labor visible in a way that made it harder to harvest. A project credit system went live in 63 days, 3 days over Sylvie's target, which she noted in an email to Nathan with the subject line, 3 days. He replied, "Noted, sending the review team to your office." She replied, "They'll need to knock." Danny Marsh finished her post-surgical PT in the spring and went back to her job as an elementary school art teacher in Columbus, which she described in a phone call to Sylvie as the most chaotic and most necessary thing she had ever done. Sylvie told her about the policy changes at Meridian, and Danny said it sounded like the kind of thing that should have existed 20 years ago. "It should have," Sylvie said. "Did you have to fight for it?" Sylvie thought about the 41-page memo, the board meeting, the 3-day argument over implementation timelines, the morning she had walked into a conference room of senior executives and said exactly what she thought without making it small enough for them to find comfortable. "Yes," she said, "but I had the documentation." One Thursday evening in late April, Nathan Voss walked into the Thai place on Dearborn at 6:58. The lighting was indeed terrible. a combination of overhead fluorescent and undersized candles that served neither ambiance nor visibility. The place was loud in the specific way of restaurants, where the food was good enough that no one cared. Sylvie was already there, at a corner table with her coat over the back of her chair and her phone face down on the table. Not because she was performing presence, because she had decided to be there. She looked up. He had found his own way in, which apparently required navigating a partial wall of takeout bags, and arrived at the table with his coat still on and an expression that was neither CEO polished nor deliberately casual, just a person who had wanted to be somewhere and now was. She nodded at the seat across from her. He sat down and took his coat off and put his phone face down on the table too, not because she had, but because the same instinct had occurred to him. "You got the soup dumplings," he said. "They take 20 minutes. I ordered ahead." "That's either very organized or you were certain I'd show up." "I ordered enough for 2, so mathematically I was optimistic." He smiled, not a managed smile, the kind that happened before the decision to make it. Sylvie looked at him for a moment in the bad lighting, with the noise of the restaurant around them and the spring rain beginning to come down against the windows, and thought that she had spent the last several months being the most clear-eyed about everything except this, which was probably the appropriate order of operations. "For the record," she said, "this is not forgiveness for the investigation disrupting my life." "Noted. And if this turns into something involving a communication strategy, I will personally audit your supply chain." "The communications team has been informed that some things are not content." "Good." The soup dumplings arrived. They ate. The conversation moved from the policy review to a structural problem in Meridian's analytics pipeline to Danny's school and the art projects that apparently involved paint in quantities Danny described as merely necessary. Nathan told her about his grandmother in Tucson, who had taught him to read balance sheets at 11 and described most human problems as a failure of clear accounting. Sylvie said that sounded like someone she would have liked. Nathan said she probably would have been terrified of her. Sylvie said she was only terrified by people who had good reasons to be terrifying. She had excellent reasons, Nathan said. Then I definitely would have liked her. The rain came harder against the window. The restaurant stayed loud. Neither of them looked at their phones. Outside, Chicago settled into the particular gray-silver of a spring evening that had decided to be April on its own terms. The kind of city that didn't arrange itself around anyone's expectations, that required you to show up as you actually were and then got out of the way. Sylvie reached for the last soup dumpling at the same moment Nathan did. They both stopped. "You had a harder week," he said. "By what measure?" The 3-day email had a specific energy. She took the dumpling. "You paid for the dumplings in advance," she said. "I didn't." "Then we're splitting the check." "Obviously," he said. She looked at him across the table in the bad light, in the good restaurant, in the city that had decided to rain on a Thursday for no particular reason. "Next time," she said, "you order ahead." Nathan Voss did not try to turn that sentence into a story. He just nodded and meant it as what it was, a next time ordinary and unhurried belonging to both of them equally. I keep thinking about the moment Nathan saw Sylvie straighten her keyboard. Not the boardroom, not the termination, that one small gesture, a woman putting her workspace back in order after someone had reached across it without asking, and the way Nathan recognized it for exactly what it was. That's the moment the whole story turned on. There's something I've come to believe, and it didn't come from a book or a lecture. It came from watching what actually happens when people make choices under pressure. The choices that nobody's grading, the ones where the easier thing and the right thing aren't the same, and you pick anyway. Nathan was late. He had a board call. He had a rental car with no heat and a dead phone. He still got out of the car, not because he expected anything from it, because it was a reasonable thing to do for another person, and he was still someone who did reasonable things. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. Not the outcome, the origin. Because the outcome only happened because the character was already there before anyone was watching. Sylvie had something different. She had 41 pages of documentation she built on her own time, during months when she was also managing her sister's recovery and fighting insurance denials, and doing work that kept getting forwarded under someone else's name. That doesn't come from luck or position. It comes from a specific kind of intelligence. Not just the analytical kind, though she had plenty of that, but the kind that refuses to let injustice become invisible just because naming it is inconvenient. She saw the pattern. She tracked it. She kept the receipts when everyone around her had learned to let things go. A lot of people knew what Garrett Finch was doing. A lot of people had seen it for years. The difference wasn't information. It was the decision to treat the truth as something worth protecting, even when protecting it cost something. And then there's the third thing, the one I think gets talked about the least. Both of them had to keep going. Nathan had to sit in front of a board that implied his judgment was compromised and answer without flinching. Sylvie had to walk into a feedback session, knowing half the room had already decided what her role in the story was, and say what she actually meant anyway. That's not comfort. That's not confidence. That's just deciding that the weight of staying quiet is heavier than the weight of speaking, and carrying the second one forward. I don't think the universe rewarded them. I think they built something slowly and without a guarantee out of the same materials most people have. Decency, clarity, the willingness to keep going on a Thursday when it would have been much easier not to. The soup dumplings at the end aren't the point. The point is two people who had both, at different times, chosen the harder right thing, and found themselves sitting across a table in bad lighting, neither one of them performing anything. That's not a fairy tale. That's just what it looks like when the accounting finally comes out clean.